Kia ora. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a nice lunch. Before we get into our next item, which is number 14, around waters, can I just, it was good that we broke for lunch, but can I just ask everybody, please be respectful of your colleagues around the table. We've got good tikanga here around how we engage with each other, and I just don't want to see that spiral out of control. I realise people have, there's been, some issues in the past, but look, we've got the rest of the day to complete, and perhaps some of those things can be said a little bit later. So if we can concentrate on the issues at hand, that would be great and appreciated. All right, we're now going to look at local water done well, and their water entity decisions. So if I could invite Julie Keane and Mike and Scott to the table, please. Oh, and also we have, hello, oh yes, got it back again. And we also have Dan Boniface from Morrison Lowe online for us as well. Welcome, Dan. Okay, over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Monaghan te kuingwa. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. Look, we're really happy to bring this paper to you today, the Local Water Done Well decision paper. And it feels like a significant milestone for us as a project team to be here today. We do have a few slides that we're going to work through, not too many. We wanted just to pick out a few points from the report, and between us we'll just make our way through these slides before we, oh, look at that, technology. Oh, there we go. Okay, so that's just what we're going to just quickly cover if we want to move on to the next slide. Have I got control? Yeah. Okay. So I think it's becoming pretty clear that the water sector is moving into a highly regulated future. There's going to be, and there already is, increased scrutiny on things like quality. We've seen that through Taumata ROI, the wastewater standards. Following quickly on the heels of the wastewater standards will be stormwater national standards. But we also know from the Commerce Commission that both finance and economic regulation is coming pretty hard on the industry as well. We know that ring fencing of costs for water is going to drive investment into water infrastructure, and that's the idea of this. And I think the point here is it doesn't matter which operating model you make a decision on, those regulatory burdens are going to be falling pretty hard on all delivery models. Scott's going to take us through this slide.
Good afternoon, councillors and Mayor. So just want to highlight the funds from operations calculation. Now this is a different concept for councils in regards to how budgets are constructed. So this is, it's the FFO ratio is the level of revenue that's needed to fund organisational expenditure, including then the balance with the debt, whereas as you'll know from this morning's conversations, debt repayments and things are built into council's rates budget. So it is quite a different operating model that we're moving to. The higher the percentage ratio, the more revenue that is needed to be sought from users up front. So an organisation using the number of connections with less than 5,000 would need to have higher revenue to cover its operations and provide assurance to the place that you borrow the money from, in this case the LGFA. So they've also provided some guidance regarding the ability for a water services CCO to borrow more based on a lower FFO ratio. So the goal is the lower FFO ratio as possible, and showing that scale does matter for this. I'll carry on talking around nature calls, and Mike might be able to help me here for this. We've been based all of the information on the 24 to 34 LTP, so that is the 480 million excluding inflation. We've done some initial sensitivity analysis around the differing costs of that project, and that's included in one of the attachments to the paper. Regardless of the final cost of the nature calls project, it shows that scale is going to be better for our consumers. And in the early part, particularly the first 10 years covering this current LTP period, the level of increases to our consumers would be significantly higher if we were to select an internal business unit or a standalone PNCC Water Services CCO. It could be deemed unaffordable to some of those consumers, and there is an affordability test that we have to meet by 1 July 2028. Anything more?
Not too much more, just the point that decisions won't be made around which option will be the BPO until early 2026. So just being aware of the time frames around those decisions.
So what's left with council should we choose to pursue a water services CCO today? There's two real big impacts to the remainder of council, and that is the stranded overheads and the impact to council's debt and revenue. So I'd just like to highlight section 11 of the report, and I've put this graph here on the screen, so hopefully it's a little bit bigger than on your agenda papers. So we have done some modelling based on our debt to revenue ratios. So the dark blue line is the current LTP as we adopted in June last year. The orange line is the budget that we adopted a couple of hours ago and modelled through the same 10-year period as the LTP. So you can see that that ratio moves around a little bit based on the updated capital projections. The purple line there is if we removed all of the water services capital programs, all of the water services operational expenditure, and reallocated the stranded overheads back across the remainder of council's activities. Additionally, we have not included the additional debt repayment that was in the LTP, and I do have to make a slight correction to a figure in the paper. Section 11.9 has 75 million. That should be 150 million in the LTP that was adopted. Thank you, Councillor Wood, for popping that one on my radar this morning. Just like to note that in 2033-34 on that graph, it does show that we breach our self-imposed policy. There are some significant non-waters capital programs out that far in the LTP. It would be a matter of putting additional debt repayment back into the budgets at that time to ensure that we remain under that cap. It's just been shown without that debt repayment to highlight that through the middle period of the LTP where we were having challenges during those LTP discussions, we have a bit of ability should some of our revenue assumptions not fall true in that period. There are some significant revenue assumptions in there to keep us within that current debt limit. The other side of that is the annual operating revenue. So this graph's also in the paper, but again, the same three series of data, and just goes to show the level of change if we were to take the waters revenue out. It's one part of the calculation.
Yeah, I'm sort of getting close to wrapping up this part. Is just a very quick look at some of the benefits and challenges of the options. Don't intend to go through each of those bullet points, but Scott's just talked about the increased borrowing capacity of options. I think the message throughout has been scale is important for this organisation or the future organisation. Some of the non-financial benefits that we perhaps haven't elaborated on are things like the resilience to respond to operational requirements, increased opportunities for attraction and retention of staff and skilled staff into a larger organisation. Some of the challenges, of course, are around the shareholder expectations of a larger organisation with multiple councils. Some of those relationships with iwi may be more challenging the more number of iwis that are involved, and the number of connections. Depending on how many join and how many don't join, we could still have those challenges of connections.
Thanks, Mike. I do need to apologise for a small typo in last week's workshop material. For the PNCC base case, I've inadvertently picked up the inflated household costs. So we've corrected that in both the paper and this slide from last week's workshop that I believe was redistributed late last week to elected members. So apologies about that. And as Mike sort of just alluded to, the scale is the really key thing here. The models point to a trend over time. They're not perfectly precise when you're looking 10, 20 and 30 years out, but they do indicate a trend that scale matters to the consumers at the end of the day. And I think that will take us to questions.
Yep. Through the chair, just we'll take the rest of the reports as read and open it up for comments and questions. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, team. Just for the sake of clarity, I want to make sure I understand correctly. So on page 83, under option 3, the status quo, talks about $3,800 per year per household. I assume that's including, in fact, it says that's including the IFF levy of around $1,000. The wording in the report from pages sort of 94 and 95 is quite unclear because it says PNCC base case status quo LTP plus IFF levy. By that you mean it's $2,790 plus $1,000, bringing us to that $3,800 figure versus the options we have in front of us today, to be clear.
I think in the rush to get the paper completed late last week, we've missed turning those pluses to including. So the figures throughout for the PNCC base case are inclusive of the IFF levy to give you a true comparator from future options to status quo, or the base case as it is now.
Okay, so hence why I'm confused. So page 83 is really clear that the option within 10 years is $3,800 per year. But later in the paper it talks about $2,700 plus the IFF. My understanding from the workshop last week is those figures around the 2005, 2007 were not including the IFF. I can't understand how $2,790 includes the $1,000 for the IFF. That's not what we've been told in the past.
So we have utilised the model based on the same base on the, sorry, let me start that again. The base case we've moved on to a calculation model the same that would be under the Water Services CCO. So we've moved it onto that FFO type calculation. Those figures in there are including all of the PNCC expenditure that's outlined in the LTP on the same calculation model, so you have a true comparison between the options in front of you, because that will be how the Commerce Commission will regulate council in the future.
So the 3,800 figure on page 83 is incorrect then? I'm just trying to understand, are we saving $100 by doing this, or are we saving $1,100 by doing this? Because that's quite a considerable difference in terms of what we're trying to achieve.
I think you're right, that's an error in the paper.
Okay, so which?
The numbers on the screen, the 2790, is the correct figure that we should be comparing to. Apologies about that error.
Okay, well that's considerably different than what we had last week, so that's purely to those figures being inflated over 10 years, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, well, that doesn't fill me with hope. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, team, for the work that you've done to get us here. Just a few questions. So just starting off the numbers on the screen there. So in the 10-year column now, it would appear there's no real difference between a standalone CCO and some of those other multi-options in terms of the actual dollars and cents at the 10-year point, and they're all within 100 or less.
On a purely numbers perspective, yes. What that means to an individual consumer is up for debate, and I won't go into that space.
Thanks. Do you think the community knows that financially the standalone CCO option stacks up pretty well for the first 10 years?
I probably should say that is the point in time at year 10. As I referred to in terms of the level of increases in the first 10 years, that is where the unaffordability piece comes in. There is a real spike due to nature calls in the first 10 years that would probably be considered unaffordable by almost everyone out in the community.
Thank you. Just my question was kind of around community awareness of these numbers, and given that you're now one of the second elected members that's a little bit surprised by some of the numbers, how much community awareness is there around the actual numbers?
Yeah, as you'll know, we didn't have a PNCC standalone option consulted on as well, so I guess unless you went hunting for those numbers, they're probably not as aware as they could have been.
Thank you. guess I'm trying to understand, like, the numbers that we went out with in terms of the consultation. How valid are those numbers now?
I actually can't remember the numbers out of the consultation document, and I haven't looked at it in some time, but what I know is Julie and the transition team across the region, and including just south of the region, alongside with Dan, have been working on the numbers that are on screen with the latest information that we have based on updated guidance from the likes of LGFA where applicable.
But to be clear, these are different numbers than we went out with to the community.
Kia ora tātou, Julie Keane, Transition Manager. To respond to your question, Councillor, yes, that is correct. I guess I'll point out, however, that you may recall that when we went out to consultation, we were the first to go to consultation, and so we were working with the information that we had available to us at the time. And option one, as you will have read in our paper, became a non-option as a result of decisions made by Kapiti Coast and Manawatu District. But our option two gave us the opportunity to pivot into how we had worded our consultation document to reflect that it could be councils within the Manawatu Whanganui region. So to your question, yes, the numbers are different to what we had included in the consultation, but I think primarily it was a timing matter.
Thanks. And in terms of some of the other assumptions in that consultation document, like cross-subsidy or harmonization, depending how we refer to it, are those assumptions still valid?
So I think the CFO provided an answer, or it might have been me, in hearings that we had the assumption that costs were harmonised at the year 10 mark. So there was no assumption about harmonisation or cross-subsidisation, however you want to frame it, up until that point. And if there was to be any decision about that in a water services CCO, that would be a decision for the board at an appropriate point in time that would be deemed.
Thanks. So are those the assumptions as of today, or those are the assumptions as of the consultation document, or are they the same?
They're the same. So
Yeah.
there's harmonisation at year 10, unless I'm going to be corrected by Dan. Can you just confirm that's the case, Dan, please?
Sorry, I was just finding the mute. There, in your slide deck, you have harmonisation at day one, and you also have no harmonisation, which is the local price scenario.
Sorry, just for clarity, that would be the attachment to the paper. Dan's given us both options. The slide deck is the no harmonisation option.
And that differs from what was in the consultation document, which did have a harmonization in it.
Yes.
Okay, no, thank you. There was a justification slide put up a little while ago that said the larger the scale, the greater efficiency is to be gained. Just wondering if that's the case, why wouldn't we go for a place like Wellington that's got actually a lot of scale?
We could have. The requirements around consultation under the new legislation don't require us to look at every practicable option. And so as we were working through this process, you will recall in the many workshops that we've had with you and the drop-in sessions where we were working through the process of which were our options that we wanted to take to consultation, we had only considered those within the Manawatu Whanganui region, and then latterly the Kapiti Coast option that was then included.
Thank you. There's been some discussion around, I guess, potential staying out of a multi-CCO, smaller scale, that there might be challenges recruiting staff in there. Just wondering, given that there's already a big multi-CCO just down the road from us, like, are we currently having challenges with recruiting and retaining staff?
There certainly is a small pool of talent in the water industry in New Zealand, and often we've had to bring people from outside the Three Waters expertise area and spend a long time doing in-house training and bringing people up to speed. So that is what we've experienced.
And is that attributable to the fact that there's like a big water CCO next to us already effectively with Wellington Water?
I think the comment about the perceived benefit would be an organisation with scale would have the ability to retain and attract staff as opposed to a smaller organisation. We obviously we're not working in a larger organisation at the moment, so I haven't got that direct experience, but that would be that would be the impression.
Thank you. Just finally, Mr. Mayor, just interested to know how long the water service delivery plan actually goes for. Is it what's the review cycle and refresh cycle on that?
So the Water Services Delivery Plan is a one-off document that is only required to be completed once. As when the Water Services CCO has then been established, they are then required moving forward to write a strategy that responds to the statement of expectation that councils or the shareholding councils have put together. So the plan itself covers a 30-year plan, the 30-year program. Hence the reason the DIA have indicated that we would be using things such as our 30-year infrastructure strategy and the LTP to produce what we're calling the WSDP in our report.
Thanks. And in terms of what's possible within that plan, if we were of a view that things were a little bit fluid and uncertain and rushed at this stage, could we indicate basically a plan that said we were going to go as a standalone CCO for say 3 years and then look at partnership options then, or at 6 years, or whenever might be appropriate? Or do we have to actually pull the trigger today on whether or not it's joint forever?
I think as we've indicated in our report that there are many different models that are unfolding around the country in terms of how people are treating this. I guess from a PNCC standalone option, elected members need to be mindful that we haven't consulted on a standalone CCO, which under legislation my understanding would be that we would potentially need to go out to reconsult.
And given there's 90 days between now and roughly 90 days between now and the 3rd of September, I've seen some other councils have been out doing refreshes of their consult. Is there potential to do that within a June, July window that would get us updated information in August?
We might ask Liv to just come down and speak to the consultation piece, but from a staff perspective, that would put an incredible amount of workload on some key individuals in a very short time frame. At the same time as we're trying to do annual report audits, pre-election reports, election periods and that sort of stuff. So it would be my recommendation to not do that, but it is the decision of the room at the time.
Thank you.
We can always go and seek more feedback. I guess my advice would be just to check in with Desiree and see what her view is from a legal perspective, but also I guess just the element of confusion it might also bring in at this time with our community, but also our partner communities as well. I think we have the ability through how we provide our updates to our community to explain whatever decision you choose to make today and how we got to that. And I think from I guess the get-go with local water, we've also consistently had to explain that I think the analogy is that we're building the plane, like we're trying to do things on the fly without the best information. So I guess, Desiree, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor. The legislation that we're operating under, I think there's been some advice coming out from DIA and the Minister's Office that once you've undertaken some consultation, and we would need to confirm this, but as we understand it, is that you don't need to reconsult again, but undertaking some level of engagement would, in my view, be necessary.
Thank you all, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, just trying to take that in. And I do have some further questions. But so I think Julia said that we would need to reconsult if we were to consider a single CCO, but the Chief Executive is saying we would undertake some engagement. When you say we would just need to undertake some engagement, would that include if we were considering a single CCO, or would that just be if we were considering one of the options that we've already consulted on?
Again, probably just need to, we're probably, depending on how quickly we go this afternoon, whether or not we just need to take a break to just check a couple of things. But as we understand it, once you've, if you choose to go back out, you don't need to, as we understand it, you don't need to reconsult, so go through a full consultation process again. You could just take a couple of weeks of engagement on a particular option that may not have been on the list originally. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. So my first question is on page 95, the chart that's at the bottom there on table 7 with those 5 options outlined. If we had consulted the community with that information, do you think we would have had different feedback?
Through the chair, it's hard to tell. We went out with the options that you asked us to go out and consult with the community on. It's probably hypothetical as to whether or not we would have got a different result as a result of different options we would have put out.
Okay, thank you. Just have some questions around stranded overheads. Has any financial modelling or estimates or assumptions been made of the impact of that on our organisation?
The only modelling we've done to this point is reallocate all of the overheads from the waters activity across the remainder of council's activities. We haven't done any rates increase modelling that far out. We only do the rates modelling for the year immediately ahead. I guess by reallocating all of the stranded overheads, we've given you effectively the worst case scenario through the debt to revenue results that are in the papers in section 11.
Just can you remind me, I think I did read it somewhere, how much is all of the overheads that would have to be reallocated? Is that in the papers somewhere here?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Cameron Mackay, GM Corporate. That's paragraph 11.5. So the overheads circa about 5.7 million, but 3 million of those, as I understand it, capitalised part of the capital program. I guess one of the reasons why it's difficult to do a detailed analysis at the current time is depending on what you choose today, and going through the transition period will determine exactly of how much is genuinely stranded, what would actually reduce directly as a result of moving parts of council's current operations, and potentially what we might contract back as a potential option for service, perhaps in terms of supporting this organisation in the initial part. So that's quite a detailed piece of analysis that would come, that would need to work through post any decision.
Thank you. So just going to graph 3 on page 98 and looking at year 27-28 and the difference in operating revenue, would those amounts be like 180,000? Would the purple be about 180,000 and the orange be about 220,000? Or do we have actual amounts for those?
That would probably be about right. If you give me a couple of minutes, I should be able to get the actual figure.
So the difference being perhaps 40 million, is that 40 million? Or,
Give or take.
yeah. So the stranded overheads of, say, 5.7 million, does that, am I understanding correctly that if we had a reduction of revenue of, say, 40 million, that our reduction in expenses would only be 34.3? Yeah, or
No.
thereabouts, I'm just,
So the reduction in revenue is removing all of the waters activity and then adding back in the revenue for the stranded overheads being reallocated. So your reduction in expenditure is probably more like 45 million, and then the 5 million's added back in to give you the 40 million reduction.
so the increase, I guess where I'm trying to understand is there's two sides of the equation in terms of our consideration. There's what the financial modelling is of whatever the new water entity would be, which we've been given a lot of information of. The other half of the equation in my mind is the impact of what's left behind as the organisation, which is why I'm sort of interested in understanding the stranded overheads. If that 5.7 million sounds like it's a significant, fairly significant aspect of that, how much of the potential advantages that we would gain from the CCO would be offset by the disadvantages that we would incur through the stranded overheads and the impact of that on the remaining organisation?
So if elected members were to choose an internal business unit, there would be no stranded overheads because they would stay. However, there would be additional costs for regulation and reporting and compliance that would go on top of that figure. If you pick the single CCO, you would still have the stranded overheads and you would still need to generate enough revenue to run that entity on its own. Likewise with any other joint water services CCO as well.
So why, thank you, because that was my next question. The standalone CCO, why would that not be an easier model to absorb some of the stranded overheads? No.
No, because you're still creating your own entity, and like Cam explained, it would depend on what the remainder of council structure looks like and how we could look to better utilise our assets, maybe create lease space for them and things like that. And that piece of work is far too complicated to have done at this point in time. However, I would imagine it's on the Chief Executive's radar for post-decision and operation of this entity if it was chosen.
Okay. And just moving to page 98, at the start, the amount of staff that are affected, it looks like there's about 151 staff who have partial roles in the Three Waters activities. What's the assumption on how those roles will be treated in the transition to an organisation without water?
At the risk of being very bold, I'm one of those roles.
Pardon?
At the risk of being very bold, I'm one of those roles that has a portion of time in waters. So I believe I'm in the under 30% category. So we'd have to work through that as the entity was stood up and then transitioned to, and whether, taking me as the example, whether I'm backfilled, as council would need a finance manager and that sort of stuff. Those decisions are a little bit hard to put an answer to at this point in time.
Okay, I think that's all from me. Thank
Right,
you, Mr.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you. I just had 4 questions. One is for paragraph 15.4, where it says that a standalone CCO for PNCC is not financially sustainable. I wondered if it is it in fact not financially sustainable, or is it just not delivering the same level of benefit as the other models?
The financial sustainability measures are made up of 3 parts. One of them is consumer affordability, and that's the bit that we don't think would be met by a standalone or an internal business unit as a result of our Nature Calls program.
And that's in the first 10 years?
And that's in the first 10 years, and we have to prove financial sustainability by 1 July 2028, so about the same time as Nature Calls.
Right. Thank you. Just on the FFO ratios, so a single CCO would be the same FFO ratio as a PNCC HTC combo, is that right? So it's still sitting, because the connections are still less than 50,000? Okay, thank you. My other question is about the statement of expectations, and on the assumption that we didn't retain technical waters staff to update our AMP to inform us as to what should be in the SOE
how granular can our SOE actually be? How often would we be feeding that through to a joint CCO?
Thank you for your question, councillor. The statement of expectation is going to be a very critical mechanism by which councils as shareholders will have their ability to influence what happens in the water services CCO. So I think from a decision-making point of view, understanding that there is that critical mechanism that is already going to be in place. In terms of frequency of how often you will get to input into the statement of expectation, that will be something that will be determined post understanding what the water services CCO foundational documents, etc., will actually determine. And again, you would have the opportunity to determine how frequently you wish to put a statement of expectation in place. As you'll remember in the workshops we've had before, the water services CCO has the opportunity then to respond to your statement of expectation with their statement of intent around how they intend to fulfil your expectations. And so again, there is that deliberation position that is actually available to you at that point too.
Thank you. So in terms of the technical input that might feed into developing an SOE, how would we plug that gap if we didn't have that body of staff anymore? Where would that information come from?
Can I just let the CEO respond?
Yes, through the chair. Look, that's all part of the transition work as well, in setting up the governance arrangements for any new CCO, if that's the path that you choose today. You know, the officers are still available around in order to help in that if we needed to engage some other external support to look at creating the SOE documents or these foundation documents for the entity. We'll just make sure that those sorts of things are actually put in place. We already have some level of experience, obviously, with our current CCOs and statement of expectations and that in place. So I think that we would manage that well enough, but we would be making sure that through workshops, whatever else that we needed to do with elected members to make sure that the points or concerns that you might have in creating those were taken care of along the way.
So who would be responsible for maintaining an asset management plan for waters for the city? Where would that fall?
Councillor, that would be the new entity or the service deliverer.
So it would be my understanding that an asset management plan would inform an SOE. So in this situation, would it not? So it's not very granular. It's just we'd expect water services to be delivered effectively, and
Yes.
a KPI measure within that.
Yes, through the chair. I think similar again to current arrangements that we might have in place with, just use P&AL as an example, is that the council set the expectations or the outcomes that it's expecting to achieve across the city, and what those look like relating to stormwater, water, wastewater management and the like, and being clear about that. The asset management plans talk about the delivery, what's coming next, what needs to be maintained, looked after, and those sorts of things and that as well. I think that being really clear about the outcomes that you're still wanting to see in the city are probably the key features of any statement of expectation.
Okay, thank you. My last question was, do we have any reason to consider that our water services delivery plan might be queried or not approved for any reason? What are the criteria that we might get pushback?
Councillor, I don't think there's any reason to think we couldn't produce a water service delivery plan that met all the criteria.
Do we know what the... No, never mind. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. I guess we're probably not the only council that's dealing weekly with changing figures, I suppose. And I'd like to know, please, are we in contact with these other councils of what their projected household costs are for the same entities?
We have oversight as transition teams to some of those other council figures. However, I don't know that that's our place to be commenting on their household figures. I assume all of their agendas are publicly available, just like our one is.
Important, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The figures that we've done with the modelling showing the household cost uninflated for the standalone CCO, that's on the current 480 million impact of the wastewater. And so there's a possibility of bringing that down. That could still exist.
To answer the first question, yes, it is based on the 480 and all the other LTP items that are in there. So it won't include any changes to the capital program that have been agreed this morning. The chance of it changing those figures at that point is probably lower because it's past the peak of nature calls, and the model at that point calculates what is needed to run the entity at that point. So the nature calls window actually has been and gone by the year 10 mark. So there might not actually be that much of a change for any of those figures that are stated.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions raised earlier was what the figures were available when we went out to consult. And I've just gone back through the spreadsheet that was provided by Morrison Lowe. That was in one of our websites still available to compare costs. Going back to the 33-34 year, it looks like the amount that we went out for that would have been a one council CCO was, it looks like 3,366 against our 2,790. And yet when I compare that same period for the 5 councils, I just want to confirm that I'm interpreting this correct. Looks like it was 2,537, so not so different to the figure that we've got before us. And so just wanting to confirm I'm interpreting that correct off the graph and the information provided at the time.
Councillor, can I just clarify which spreadsheet and report you are referring to, please?
Yeah, sure. It's off under the money section on the website, and it's titled Morrison Lowe Local Water Done Well Modelling, February 25. Scenarios for water CCOs in Manawatu Wanganui.
So we've had, Dan's been working on the latest assumptions as information's been provided from other councils and guidance. So we do have more updated modelling which is included in today's paperwork. So I guess there is going to be a difference for the reason that we've been continually looking at and working on that model as we go, so that we have the information here today for the decision.
Thank you. I appreciate that would be the case, but as far as the community being consulted with the information at hand, it's actually quite different if those figures are confirmed as being the reference available to public.
Through you, Mr Mayor, probably just thinking, I don't have the report in front of me, so just that the council is referring to, but if I think of some of the changes, some of the updated assumptions that have occurred through this period of time, one of the real key ones has been to understand, and it's come out, LGFA announcing how it would apply the FFO ratio. I think back at that time, there was some thought to say that the most conservative FFO ratio was applied to smaller or single entities. Since then, the guidance has been updated that's based on the number of connections, and so that's probably one of the key changes that I can think of that's probably happened to the standalone that's enabled that to have a lower FFO ratio than what it was at that time.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's all the questions I have.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry, but I think this topic of the IFF funding and where that sits into it is important. So I just want to understand, are the DIA's figures inflated or excluding inflation that we've got in the report here under attachment 3? I can't see it in their limitations, but...
Sorry, what was the page number of that report, councillor?
The report that starts on page 125 and goes through to about page 150.
I'd have to confirm this, but I believe they're inflated because that's based off a direct input from our LTP, which is of course inflated.
So the DIA's analysis on page 133 shows that excluding the IFF, we would see approximately an 8% saving for our community against LTP projections over the 10 years. It specifically says in the limitations, levy requirements for the IFF are excluded from projected household charges in those figures. If you're suggesting that including the IFF levy, we would only see a benefit of maybe 5 or 6%, that suggests that the DIA's figures are out by the realm of thousands of dollars. I can't understand how that could possibly be the case.
I think this has been a bit of the topic of the day. It's the point in time figures and the assumptions used to generate each model, and each model has its own intricacies and slightly different mechanisms. However, it's important to note the trend is the really important thing here for this, rather than the specific figures. If our LTP is bang on accurate for year 10, then we have done a brilliant job.
Can I just get perhaps one of the co-authors of all this? Dan, you're online. I notice your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The DIA analysis treats the council base case, the council IBU, as a ring-fenced unit for the purposes of debt. Whereas in your reports here, the council IBU option uses the council's balance sheet to borrow money. So you are using a whole of council debt to revenue, whereas the DIA analysis for the council business unit does not do that. It ring fences it and treats it as if it was it is only using the water revenue for the purposes of water debt. So there's quite a significant difference there.
Right, that is a significant difference. So this base case is the status quo, not the one we consulted on, which is the amended status quo, which by ring fencing. That's what you're saying.
I'm saying that DIA has treated in their analysis council as a ring-fenced unit. In your base case, you are using all of council revenue for the purposes of borrowing limits, which is what you consulted on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, sorry, Dan, which you're not allowed to do, is that right, going forward?
Not allowed.
No, if you continue as an in-house business unit, you are still allowed to borrow using the ratio of all of council debt to revenue, but you must pay for that debt using only water revenue.
Okay, I knew there was some for sure clear. Thank you.
Well, that wasn't my understanding, but so what I appreciate what you say, that there's small tweaks and differences in the models, but thousands of dollars out are not minor tweaks. What I want to be able to say to the community is, it would have cost you X amount if we didn't form a CCO, it would cost you X amount if we do. And after last week's workshop, I was of the understanding we would be saving thousands of dollars per household. Under the DIA's analysis, it shows we should be saving thousands of dollars per household. I am vexed as to how the statistics in front of us today have changed so much that we are only saving $170 at, even less than that, $100 per household. How is that possible when everything we've been told up until this point was that the savings would be in far greater magnitudes? I don't think I'm the only one confused about this.
At the risk of sounding a bit like a beaten record, that was at a point in time that the DIA did their analysis, and things change, OCR rates drop, that has impact on interest rates, all of that sort of stuff. It literally is a point in time model and a number, and it's really hard to confirm and compare February to May, even, as you'll see in front of you. So what I can say is we've got the latest information in front of you to try and let you make the best decision that's possible.
I don't know what to say, Mr. Mayor. Shall I leave it there?
Well, you can comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not now. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have one further question. Sorry about that. Just come back in. Page 208 has got a graph there with the local price comparison. PNCC. Now, the PNCC CCO, which is the long dash dot one, appears to be significantly less in the first 10 years than the other options, and the delay in that increasing above the $1,500 point seems quite a lot later. So those savings to the ratepayers, what I'm trying to understand is what the reason for that being significantly less than all the other options in that first 10 years for the PNCC CCO option.
I might start this, but defer to Dan on screen to do that. I believe that's the impact of being able to fund nature calls via the IFF levy and then the repayment of that levy over the longer term, which is why it's higher in the longer term. Dan, have I got that right?
But haven't the other options got that opportunity to fund the nature calls through that same mechanism?
I'm just trying to get to the same page you're on, Councillor. Could you give me the page number again?
It's 208, but it's page 46 of one of the reports. I'll just go.
208, 2, 6, 7, 8. Right, so we have PNCCCO. It's a combination of factors. It's related to the amount of debt that the individual CCOs can take on and how that translates to the amount of revenue that has to be charged. Hang on, I'm just trying to, have we got the, we're also looking at, you are looking at a nature calls at 285 million version as well.
Yeah,
on page 208.
Page 196 has a very similar graph, but I think that's
Yep.
at the 480 level. But it shows once again that PNCC CCO significantly less for that first 10-year period than all the other options. And I'm just wanting to try and understand why.
Because the other councils that you're involved with are also bringing in expenditure that has to be undertaken. So there's debt associated with all of your other partner councils as well. And so the revenue of the CCO has to meet the FFO ratio related to the capital expenditure. It is the simplest way to explain it.
So,
And then sorry.
Yep, sorry. Did you finish?
And then the revenue being raised allows debt to be repaid in some circumstances, which is why those peaks.
Is significant. It looks like it's about 1,600 as opposed to, am I correct to understand that the numbers at 5 years are significantly better for that PNCC standalone CCO?
Yeah, it's also worth pointing out that these CCOs aren't beginning for 3 years. So if you're only looking 5 years out, it's not really only beginning, and your nature calls expenditure is only beginning over that period of time.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, you're right. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Okay, that's our questions gone. So, colleagues, we have the recommendations to council, and there's 5 of those. And I'm going to look to move all 5 together. And looking for a seconder. Thank you to Deputy Mayor. So, Colleagues, this is around the matter of the decision being regarded as of high significance in accordance with the Council's significance and engagement policy. The Council confirm a joint water services CCO as a preferred future water services delivery model. That Council agree to partner with Horowhenua and Rangitikei in a joint services Council-controlled organisation. And just to let you know that Horowhenua voted unanimously this morning for this. That 4, that Council agree to continue to work with Ruapahu, who look to do their vote next week, and Wanganui in early July, with a view to including them in a joint water services CCO upon confirmation from these councils. And 5, that Council instruct the Chief Executive to prepare a joint water services delivery plan to be brought back to Council in August 2025 for approval prior to submission to the Department of Internal Affairs before the 3rd of September deadline, which includes further information relating to the management of stormwater. Look, colleagues, I appreciate there's been quite a number of it's a moving feast with modelling, and I just want to say that is modelling, and appreciate the work, the massive amount of work that's gone into the background. I too was surprised with some of the figures. I've been really close to this, and I still have this. Look, successive governments have said to us that there needs to be some work in this space. And scale and efficiency does matter, councillors. There's no question about that. So the evidence that I have seen certainly shows that a water entity by ourselves is going to be impossible into the future. So yes, there may be some benefits of staying out by ourselves in the next couple of years, but this is not this is a 20, 30 year decision really. The increased, I think how the LGFA are treating this is interesting as well, and around the connections and the ability to fund infrastructure, etc., is quite significant. And in terms of the staff, and I think if we're going to compare Wellington Water, which is like, which is a management company, it's not a water entity in a sense, is not really comparing apples with apples, in my opinion. So the increased borrowing, the larger scale brings the efficiency. There's 52,000 connections, the staff retention, attraction, the training, the aspiration for our staff. The big thing though is the procurement. Being able to procure at a greater scale brings definite benefits. So I appreciate that some of the questions have been around some of the modelling, and I too have some of those questions as well. But in terms of bringing a paper back to us in August 2025 does give some surety around some of those numbers being tested. I do have some concerns if you are going to change your mind and go out to a standalone, that is going to cause some massive confusion amongst everybody. I'll go to other comments. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Before I tell you what I really think of local water done well, I will tell you some of the things that I do like. I think it's actually quite useful that we move to a future where we do have a price around water. I think that's long overdue, and provided there's a free base allocation, makes perfect sense. Should have done it decades ago. Also think that some higher regulation probably makes sense. But frankly, I don't think much of what we have in front of us in terms of local water done well. Three Waters felt like a rather awkward arranged marriage, never quite got to the altar. But local water done well has the hallmark features of a shotgun wedding. I'll give you 4. Haste, force, bad decisions, and regret. So on haste, it's just nonsense that this gets locked down in 90 days when we've got numbers all over the place still today, still a lot of fluidity around partners, and the stakes are so high. I mean, the mayor's just said, the game's 20, 30 years out where we actually start to see the benefits. Why are we being ramrodded into this in 90 days? Force. We certainly didn't ask for this. I don't think the community asked for this. We've got a letter from the minister saying it's really important, but, you know, honestly, this is being done to us. if anything. In terms of bad decisions and regrets, so I think actually we're on the cusp of actually a bad decision here, and the regrets will pile up. I'm just not ready to sign on the dotted line when we don't even know who the partners are. We certainly don't know what the terms and conditions are. What's driving me to take this stance is not, believe it or not, a dislike for our neighbors. I quite like our neighbors. My fundamental bottom line is that locals should have the highest possible degree of control over essential services, and I cannot think of a more essential service than water. And yet here we are on the decision that's going to markedly decrease our constituents' influence on water services delivery. In my view, that's a bad decision. And I think we're on quite a flimsy justification. A lot of unknowns, a lot of untested, a lot of unproven going into a multi-council CCO for maybe some marginal savings, but even as we've just shown in questions now, those numbers are moving. I mentioned regret being one of the hallmarks. Well, here's one. The perfectly viable single CCO option never actually got to community for input, and I think that's a major shortcoming on us as decision makers, because I think we would have had quite a different data set in front of us in terms of community appetite. And, you know, today, as we found out, it was point-in-time numbers. They've changed radically. We made a bad call at that point and went with the idea that bigger was better and just had to get on with it. And unfortunately, I think the community is now being forced down the wrong path. A couple specific concerns. I do think far too much has been made of scale. Honestly, there's a lot of connections in Wellington, and, you know, we've got a new structure, so, you know, why didn't we go down the road and get 100,000 connections? That would have given us scale, but we never really got there. I think the reason we didn't get there is because we know that that kind of scale brings complexity, and complexity risks dysfunction and inefficiency and conflict. But what's even more concerning for me today is that we've been absolutely rushed into a limited and uncertain consultation. The numbers have changed, the assumptions have changed, partner options have changed, and viable options were not offered to the community. And I think that's resulted in a very, very weak mandate, if any. The only mandate I think we have is a letter from the minister demanding action, but I do not think we have a bottom-up community mandate to make change. So where I'd like to see us go now is to pause. And I realize with 90 days that seems quite challenging, but the best I think we can do today is not sign on the dotted line before we even know the partners, before we even know the terms and conditions, and instead offer a new round of community consultation, get updates to our residents, including the fact that a Palmy CCO is more locally accountable and financially viable, and then respond to that public input in our August meeting. What we need is all the options on the table. It's our best way and our only way to gain a local public mandate for this highly significant decision. So I'd urge you to vote against recommendations 2 to 5 and would ask you to separate those from recommendation 1 so that we can continue engaging with those neighboring councils, but also properly re-engage with our residents with all the viable options, updated numbers, and hear what the community has to say about that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've a similar theme of Councillor Barrett, actually. You know, the shotgun wedding, the haste, the force, the bad decision, regret. It is deeply concerning that the figures from as recent as February, modelling through our independent, is so different to the figures we get here in May. So different. And I get the point that modelling is modelling, but what we went out to the community to consult on recently was on a round yellow thing, and now we're looking at a blue rectangle thing. It's just quite removed from what we went out to the community just recently, actually, and I just don't think that's fair on our community. I don't think that's actually fair on us. To be here right now saying we're going to agree to all these things so we can meet a September deadline, I just think is appalling. It is appalling. And I'll say and concur without repeating everything Councillor Barrett said. We've been very similar through this whole process. Absolutely on board with what he said. And so that leaves me here with a real frustration and a real concern around supporting this here. I think somewhat blindly on the notion that bigger is better, which I did concur into up until the last couple of days. Because actually hearing confirmed here, in fact, the last hour, that the figures are so removed from what we were even considering. Even just a week ago, or it seems like weeks ago, it's just not on. And I'm going to call it out. It's just not on. So that's with the figures. And then we talk with the partners. And I have full respect to Hora Whenua because we've been committed in this journey with them. And I feel a little bit put out to go with the pause, but I really feel like it's worthy to continue on with the Hora Whenua proposition. And I get the heart from Rangatike, they wanted to go with the bigger is better and kind of get left out because the process was not good. And we're left with orphans now, and now we're getting the opportunity, which I think could be beneficial, I think, extending with Wanganui and Ruapehu, but I'm actually still not sure in the immediate term. And yeah, so that doubt gives me a concern. I'll be happy to listen to anyone else out because I see there's starting to be a queue here, but I'm indicating a discomfort with going through and widening it up unless we have the option still to go out with a considered option moving forward around the standalone being lined up as the alternate option if things still don't pan out with neighbours. So, yeah, love our neighbours. I get all that point. I think this is the central government policies that they're putting on us, and whatever colour of the ice cream you want to go with, I think both have handled this very poorly, and I think it's shows a lack of respect, I guess, for the consideration that local members give for these important assets that have been built with blood, sweat and tears of our forefathers, the ones that had the vision, they put the sweat equity in, our communities have funded it, and we've actually managed it pretty well, and then to kind of be left lumbered with this kind of pace and change and situation, I think, again, appalling. So they're my thoughts. I'll be open to others, but thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Similar to the previous two speakers, I can absolutely support recommendation 1. I believe this is a decision that has high significance in terms of our significance and engagement policy. There's no doubt about that. And it's for that reason alone that I feel extremely uncomfortable with being put under pressure to make a decision when, you know, it's been talked about like we're building a plane as we fly it. You know, the more I read through this document in the last few days, the more I felt like we're running in quicksand. There's nothing solid at all. Everything is shifting, everything is changing daily, weekly. Even our workshop last week, the information that's come out since then is significantly, I was flabbergasted to find the numbers of a standalone CCO being as affordable as what's outlined in Table 7. And I think if that option had been put to our community, I'm absolutely certain the feedback from our community may have looked quite different. In fact, even though that wasn't an option that we consulted on, we did have feedback from our community who said, why didn't we consult on a standalone CCO? You know, looking at that chart, there's two main reasons that I'm really not comfortable to proceed with these other recommendations today. One is I feel there's two sides of the coin. There's two aspects of this decision that we need to really understand fully. One is the cost implications if we go into a new entity with water. And there's been a lot of modelling and a lot of information provided to us in recent months about that. The other side of the coin is what our organisation will look like post that change. And I don't believe we have anywhere near sufficient information or modelling on what that looks like. The little bit of information in our paper indicated perhaps 5.7 million of stranded overheads. Now, if we're looking at perhaps around 30,000 connections in our community, that might save $100 a year. That's $3 million. That's less than the 5.7 that we're suddenly going to lose in potentially in the stranded assets. So we've got to look at both lots of that information in tandem. We can't just look at one and go, oh, our community will be $100 better off, so we'll do that. But if they're $200 worse off with what's left in our organisation, then what was the point of that? And yes, you know, the Mayor says scale and efficiency does matter, but that's only one side of the coin. We've got to look at the impact on our community with what's left post us if we were to proceed with something. And all the modelling in the world is not an absolute guarantee that those efficiencies will be realised. I agree with Councillor Barrett that we do need to retain, if at all possible, a high level of control with our own community. And the modelling and the graphs, I was stunned to see those graphs with so much of a more affordable option under the CCO option of only 15, you know, over the next 10 years. That's a lot more cost effective for our community, and that's at a time where they cannot, they've made it really clear they cannot afford these $2,000 or $3,000 water bills. You know, if that's a $1,500 one because of us going a standalone CCO, then I think that's worthy of consideration. So my preference at this stage would be, like the previous two speakers, to pause. If these recommendations aren't supported today, I would like to suggest that we undertake some engagement, such as the Chief Executive outlined, over a number of weeks with updated information for our community, because it's vastly different to what we consulted on. And I think we've really lost an opportunity to actually include in the first lot of consultation, to include the PNCC CCO option as what's outlined in our papers today. It could well be a viable option that may well be in the best interests of our community. I don't know that for sure, but I think our community deserves us to at least have that engagement with them, to update them on where we've got to, given how significantly different the information is from when we consulted a few months back. So I'm happy to put some words together if there is a sense in the room that now is not the appropriate time to push forward on this, and certainly urge those of you still considering your position to think about perhaps having more information is always going to be a better, to be well informed in our decision making is always going to be better.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, I think we've got really off track here. So I want to be really clear. My questions and concerns around those figures in front of us were because I feel the figures we have are undercooking the benefits of doing that. If you compare the IFF amount with the DIA figures, they assume even without the IFF, we would get an 8% saving. So that's 8% plus $1,000 per household. Our officers have suggested today that might only be in the range of $100 to $200 per household. I think we have undercooked it, not overcooked it. And so for that reason, even with these figures, which I believe don't reflect the benefits that we would truly get from doing this, every single scenario of a CCO is better than doing it on our own. Yes, there is one question around, well, if we work with Horowhenua, would it be worse off? That's besides the point, because we've got partners who are here willing to work with us at the table. So even with these figures, this is by far the right thing to do, is go ahead with what's being proposed today. Who are the partners? Councillor Barrett said Horowhenua, Rangitikei, Ruapehu, and maybe Wanganui. They're still making that decision, and we're leaving it up to them and Ruapehu to make that decision. But we've got a very well clear defined list here of who we're looking at working with. There's no mystery. The suggestion that it's 90 days, this has been over 18 months' work, in fact, frankly, many years' work for our staff and officers to get the information to us here to make this decision today. So I don't think, yes, the timeline isn't as long as some councils may like, and I appreciate that, but at the end of the day, the reason that the figures keep changing is we're working with theoretical models. And so one consultant says, well, you might get 3.5% this year and 3.8% that year and yada yada. And then another model says, oh, it might be 4.2 and then 6.8. And at the end of the day, until we do it, we are not going to know what the true benefits of doing this are. But what we do know from all this modelling is that working with partners is going to bring us significant benefit. And so I can't hand on heart today say, I believe we're going to get exactly $146 benefit per household. Frankly, I think it'll be more than that. But everything we're seeing, the evidence that the DIA has shown us from other organisations in our country and abroad that have looked at doing this, working with partners in local areas, has shown you get significant efficiencies of scale far greater than what we are budgeting for in our figures. So even at this, I would suggest, incredibly conservative estimate of what the benefits would be, which it is right to be conservative, because you don't want to overpromise in a space like this, the benefits are clear. So I believe quite passionately that this is the right thing to do. When Councillor Naylor says, oh, well, it would be 3 million in the first 10 years, yes, but then we'd be benefiting by 400 per year per household at the 20-year mark, and then 570 per year per household at the 30-year mark. So to characterise this as, okay, well, it's 3 million versus 5.2, you're not taking into account the actual scale of benefit that we get over the period that we're looking at, and those benefits have been outlined quite clearly in the information that's provided to us, with the millions of dollars that would be saved in totality over a long period of time. So yes, we could spend another 6 months or year or 2 years or 5 years getting more and more data and more evidence and building more and more models. I think at some point you have to go, is the evidence pointing us in the direction this is the right thing to do, or pointing us in the direction that it isn't? If there were alarm bells ringing today that was showing actually it might cost more to join and work with your neighbours, then I would join with you. I'd say let's pause. But even on these figures, it is showing significant benefit to setting up a regional water CCO. I think we've got willing neighbours who want to work with us, and to not make a decision today would be an insult to them. So I think this is the right thing for us to do, and I hope you'll support it, councillors.
Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm also going to support all 5 recommendations. I think it's the best suggestion to do. I think the hard work that the Mayor and the Chief Executive have done in cultivating these relationships with these 4 other councils has been really well done, and I think getting these people to the table has probably been the hardest job of all, and we haven't even seen it. We've actually not even been party to that, and actually getting these councils to the table has been really, really hard work, and well done to you. I think going forward, we can't do it alone. We haven't got enough connections to make it work, and we've been told that. We also were told by the DIA that it's not worth us going alone. They said it's far better to work with other councils. They told us that when we met with them at the convention centre. So we've actually been told that to go stand alone is not the best option for us. So we were told that at the convention centre. So I don't know if you weren't there, you weren't listening, but that's what we were told. So I think looking at these 5 recommendations, this is the best way to go. That's what I think we should do.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I rise just to say that I'm going to support all the 5 recommendations before us. And the reason why I support this is not necessarily because I like it, no, or because I'm not supporting this because I like it or anything, but the reason why I'm supporting this is simply because we have to do it. That's the direction that we're getting from the Minister. And legislation is coming through, and we've got an indication from the Minister saying that, that all councils need to present their final plan to the government by September 3rd. Now, am I happy with it? No, but it's a direction, and we have to follow the direction given by the Minister. Personally, I think, based on all the, meetings that we've had around this, or whether it's the workshops and that sort of thing, I think, going alone, it will actually, in the report, it's actually stated that, going alone is not a viable option. And the financing and the financial modeling done around us actually tells us that going alone is not financially viable to our community. So I'm not sure why we're thinking or trying to entertain the idea of trying to go alone when we know that through scales that will contribute, scale and increased borrowing capacity will contribute to affordability. I'm not quite happy as well with this process because, like I was talking to Councillor Naylor in the council chamber, and saying that, this feels like having, building an aircraft and actually flying it whilst you're building it. And this is a key decision that we're making, not only for now, but also for future generations. And I feel like we're making key decisions based on information that we do not have, with legislation still to come. I would love to see central government actually provide the legislation before we actually make this decision. But we don't have the choice. And for the interest of our community and the reputational risk that we run for not obeying or following direction, I'm going to vote in favor of this. But if it was for me, personally, I don't think I would have followed this process, but it's not up to me. So, and also looking at, the cost benefit analysis, and also the greater efficiency that we are to actually gain from, from scale, which actually works in favor of our community 20 years and 30 years from now. It's not about the now, but it's about the future. Future ratepayers that we're thinking about as well, the next generation of ratepayers that we're thinking about, making it cheaper for them by doing this as a regional CCO. So on the basis of that argument, I'll be voting in favor of this. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. Well, I sympathise and can see where Councillor Barrett is coming from, Councillor Denison. This has been done to us, and government policy changes and legislations have impacted us quite significantly. But having looked at this, I think by partnering with 2 to 4 councils through a CCO, we unlock, as mentioned, economies of scale, shared expertise and financial sustainability. Together we can reduce costs, improve service delivery and invest in long-term infrastructure, ensuring that every household and business has access to reliable and safe quality water services. This collaboration is more than just a financial strategy, it's a commitment to future-proofing our water services while retaining, gosh, I don't even know if this is a word, local-ish ownership and decision-making. I'll qualify that very soon. By working together, we are stronger and better equipped to serve our people. The paper stated that there is a perceived challenge, that there are perceived challenges of working with an increased number of iwi relationships. But one thing I can guarantee, they'll all consider why water is the greatest in terms of they don't view it, and I'm going to finish with this quote, water is not simply a service or commodity, it is a taonga, essential to the well-being of the environment, our whānau and future generations. I didn't write that, but that's from that letter that the iwi had written together. Those iwi, the 4 iwi the representatives who met with us out at Rangimārie and Marae, it is a positive challenge to get us all together at times, but they committed to that in what they wrote. They signed up for that. There's another thing that makes me have more hope about this with regards to iwi, is that there is whakapapa between us, those of us who live locally. Haunui Ananaia came from Wanganui, from Aotearoa, over here, down through Horowhenua and so forth. And so there is that whakapapa, that understanding. I think if we were to go with somewhere like Wellington, that's too far away. That would be a bridge too far. Engari, koera oku whakaro. Just my 2 cents there. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, colleagues. Look, just in right a reply, please just don't politicise this. This is, I'm actually quite flabbergasted that we, it's quite unbelievable that we're thinking of doing this ourselves. I mean, successive governments have said that there needs to be something done around scalable water entities. Now, regardless of whether it's red, blue, green, yellow, whatever, the same message is coming through. And I find it incredible that you now think we can do all this, but really, we've had an adverse audit report. And it was around our wastewater plant, or a big part of it was anyway. And now, all of a sudden, we can do it by ourselves. I think it's ludicrous. I just don't know where I've been the last 2 years. Maybe I was in some other council. But actually, we need some partners, people. Absolutely we do. Look, I get that the 11th hour, some of the modelling numbers have changed, but like Councillor Wood, I do think we've undercooked some of the real benefits here. Look, colleagues, this is about the future, and thank you to the Deputy Mayor for bringing that to the fore. We need to show some leadership, people. We absolutely do. It isn't about in 3 or 6 years' time we go it alone and then we see if there's another taker out there. I mean, that's not strategic. It's treating this as a bit of a show. It isn't. It's a strategic and significant decision you've got to make. We've been through, gosh, it seems like years of this. So please look at what's on the screen there. We have Horowhenua who have been with us the entire time, and now you want to leave them at the altar. I think that's really disrespectful. Really disrespectful. Also, there is scale, there is efficiency on that. And councillors, if you don't know that, it's just nuts. There is actually benefits in having some scale. And there will come efficient. Look, if the officers thought the standalone was going to be there, they would have put it up. But they didn't. So please make the right decision, show some leadership. This is about the future, and vote positively for the 5 recommendations, please. We'll take number 1 first, please. Okay, sorry, we've got a technical issue. We'll do that vote again, please. This is number 1. Has passed 15 votes for and none against. All right, we will now vote for 2, 3, 4 and 5, please. And that has passed 12 votes for and 3 against. All right. Thank you. We're now to number 15 on our order paper, which is the Te Matua Opatoa governance and management structure option. And I invite Cameron Mackay and Kathy Deaver-Todd to come to the table, please. This is page 215 of your papers.
Thank you, councillors. We'll take the report as read. The report is asked or seeks a decision from council on confirming your preferred option that we consulted with the community on for a jointly governed council-controlled organisation. One of the reasons that this decision at this time is important to council, even though it'll be some while before we establish it, is as late as yesterday, when we were considering our application to RIF, they were asking us to confirm details of what our intentions were and what the proposed structure was going forward. It became quite apparent during those discussions that there's still a bit of detail to work through in terms of the process of setting up, but it is certainly important to that funding body that we confirm the structure.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Cam, anything you want to add?
Probably just one thing. So whilst we haven't necessarily firmed up yet exactly what type of nature the entity might be, it's probably in line to be something of a charitable nature, probably a charitable trust at this point, but that still has to be worked through, and particularly with the RIF funding as well, to ensure that what we do put in place fits with those parties that are contributing to this project.
Great, thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just in terms of the next steps that are outlined on page 221, the policy direction that council gave around construction of facilities that are dependent on external funding not progressing until that funding is gained. Does that translate to other supporting mechanisms such as the establishment of a joint CCO or other, where there are other costs that relate to the establishment? Does that policy mean that that's held off until that external funding is secure?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding of the resolution is that physical construction can't take place until the funding is secure. The other consideration here is that for the funding itself to be able to be received by the council or the entity actually needs to be set up to receive it. So the work has to take place to get to that point, but no construction can take place until that's confirmed.
Thank you. So you suggest, I'm aware that we needed to make a decision on the governance model in order to have some, potential success with those funding applications. But are you suggesting that it actually has to be stood up and ready and running before that those applications can be considered?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we all have a fairly reasonable indication before we're actually standing this thing up in totality. However, the funding has to go to the entity for which is going to deliver the project, so it has to exist.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Thanks, Cam. Right, we've got recommendations there, two of those. It's around the council agreeing to establish a jointly governed council or CCO governed by Council Rangitane for Te Mataupatoa Civic Marae Cultural Centre, subject to council confirming ongoing funding in the 2025-26 annual plan. Two, that council note the following steps are required before the new jointly governed CCO commences operations. Proposed establishment, cost processes, including relevant entity agreements such as shareholder agreements or trust deed, a statement of expectation agreed by council, a statement of intent agreed upon between the board and the shareholders, outlining the specific objectives, clear roles and responsibilities for the CCO organisation, including council and Rangitane roles in monitoring and accountability, and then appointment of board members. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Colleagues, this is just another small step in that process. I can't name anything, but we have been successful in another $1 million. So it is gradually happening, and we do have ongoing discussions around the RIF fund at a very, very high level, and that is pending as well in a positive manner. So this is just another small step in the journey of this significant project for the city. Hope you can support it. The Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, tēnā tātou. I'm grateful to the staff, the officers, for bringing this forward and highlighting that it is Council's preferred option for a jointly governed CCO with Council and Rangitane. I think that exemplifies the long-standing and positive relationship that the Council have with Mana Whenua. It's an authentic partnership, one with mutual respect and dignity. And I want to allay fears. We have said that nothing can progress until we have funding in place. And as mentioned by Cam, and I'm very grateful for what he said there, that the entity needs to be set up in order to receive funding. Similarly to what we've seen before when we've been here, sometimes we know when people come and ask for some support of a kind, then that is a boost to enable them to get funding from external sources. So this is in that realm as well. Alright, I'm happy to support this. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Okay, councillors, we will vote, please. And that's passed 14 votes for and 1 against. All right, we now move through to number 16, our council work schedule, and that's on page 223 to 225, and there's a number of things there that go right through to the 8th, and are there any, I'm quite happy to move the work schedule be received dated 4th of June 2025, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any questions to that? There being none, we will vote, please. It's passed 15 votes for and none against. All right, we move through to number 17. This is around recommendations from the Strategy and Finance Committee, Part 1 Public of the 28th of May 2025, Part 1, and I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Dennison, to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to stand to move the recommendations from our Strategy and Finance Committee meeting the 28th of May, and just question whether I can move the Part 2 confidential at the same time? Rather not? Okay, I'll just move the Part 1. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
And seconded by Councillor Naylor, thank you. Matters arising, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Colleagues, just very briefly.
And that is passed 14 votes for with 1 abstention. Okay, just our last part of Part 1, colleagues, is number 19 around excluding the public, and then we'll go to a break after that. And this is around moving into Part 2 because of negotiations around business dealings, and I'm quite happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No other commentary, we will vote, please. And it's passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. So what we'll do, colleagues, is we'll break. We'll come back in at 3:15 for